Good afternoon, everyone. And morning, those of you who are in different parts of the globe. I am Camille de Silva, Chief Executive Officer of the Caribbean Corporate Governance Institute. And it is my pleasure to welcome you to this, our third meeting of the International Learning Network. This informal network was launched in November last year at the end of our global conference on corporate governance. This concept is in fact the brainchild of Professor Bob Garrett, who has joined us for this meeting from his home in London. And we are very happy to have him, as well as all other persons who are here with us for today's session. In fact, participants who have joined us in this virtual meeting include many of those who were part of our initial global conference and who agreed to being part of this informal learning network. Our network meets once every 2 months on the first Wednesday of every other month. It includes a keynote speaker who brings some of the burning questions to bear that is at the forefront of discussions on governance. For instance, at our first meeting, retired Corporate Secretary, Mr. David Jackson from BP in the UK, spoke on the evolving role of the Chairman's Office. The second meeting was addressed by Dr. Peter Crow from New Zealand with a presentation on the governance of family-owned businesses. The recordings of these two presentations are available on our website as well as our YouTube channel for your edification. I will now like to give a brief rundown on our agenda for today, which you would have received in your email reminder links this morning. Today's session will comprise of greetings from our chairman, Mr. Nigel Romano. This would be followed by opening remarks from Professor Bob Garrett. Most of you may know Professor Garrett as the author of the best-selling governance book, The Fish Rots from the Head. He is in fact almost completing his latest governance book, so we look forward to the publication of that. Professor Garrett, as I indicated before, is really the power behind this informal network, and we are very happy to have contributions and insights from him. Following the opening remarks from Professor Garrett, we hand over to our moderator today, who is Ms. Camille Facey, joining us from Jamaica. She will be introducing our presenter today, who is Ms. Charlotte Valeur, who is joining us from the UK, as well as our two panelists, Jane Valls from the Gulf and Professor Frank Kunneman, who is currently in Holland. Following the presentation and response from panelists, you will be invited to participate in a question and answer segment. After this, we take a short 15-minute break and then return to have a discussion on moving forward with our International Learning Network and evolving practices in governance. This is where we invite your comments and suggestions as to how you see governance practices emerging. We end today's session with closing remarks from Alison Delan-Chibilige, who is currently in Uganda and who shared with us earlier that she hoped to soon be moving to the UK. Alison is no stranger to us. She is a global expert and one of the original faculty members for CCGI. Now, just before I hand over to our chairman to bring greetings, I would like to share briefly on Governance Week, which would be held from June 27 to July 2nd this year. Professor Mervyn King from South Africa, one of the foremost authorities on corporate governance today, will deliver the keynote at the opening ceremony, which will be held on Sunday, June 27th from 4 to 6 p.m. This will be followed by 5 days of conference. The structure comprises an opening speaker, followed by 3 panel discussions, each of an hour and a half length. Day 1 focuses on the corporate secretary's evolving role in governance, and the opening will be done by Camille Facey, who is our moderator today. Day 2 focuses on governance of the private sector, with the opening to be delivered by Ronald Dayton Bird, who is from PwC Barbados. Day 3 focusing on governance of the public sector, with Dr. Terence Farrell from Trinidad and Tobago presenting on the findings of a task force that was appointed to review governance of state boards. Day 4 would look at governance of small and medium enterprises and family-owned businesses. We have one of our members, Elizabeth Cox from Guyana, who is also chair of a family-owned business in Belize, and she will be presenting on her Belize experience. Day 5, we focus on governance of groups and conglomerates, and that day the opening is to be delivered by Professor Garrett and will include a range of focus on the complexities in this environment. I'm also extremely excited to share that along with 5 other governance institutes, we will be hosting a Women in Governance Conference series, which will begin on July 29th. Collaboration includes the Board of Director Institutes from the Gulf, and we have Jane here, who is Executive Director of the Board of Institute from the Gulf. Also with South Africa, New Zealand, Hong Kong, and Mauritius. You can get a lot more details on these and other events on our website. Now, I'd just like to make a few housekeeping announcements before we begin. We'd like to ask all of our participants to please keep your microphone on mute, during the presentation and panel discussion. For those of you who may be new to Zoom, there is an icon at the bottom of your screen to raise your hands when you want to get our attention. You will need to unmute yourself and then press the mute icon again as soon as you are done to minimize any disruptive noises. You may also make comments or ask questions in the chat feature during the session. We welcome if you would like to put your videos on, as it does enhance the experience of participants to know who are the other persons who are sitting in the virtual room with them. We also ask, please, that you ensure that your full name is listed on the participants list for that reason as well. As usual, our technical support for these online meetings is provided by Christy Johnson-Crouch from SmartServe. If you want to get any online support for your meetings, Christy is really excellent at this. Christy will also be sharing the recordings for today's session to all our participants, and it will also be made available on our social media pages and YouTube. Persons who may wish to earn CPDs or PDUs as part of your ongoing certification, you can in fact use these hours from the session. To do so, you need to send us an email requesting the certificate, and we will verify your registration and attendance and then issue that to you. So finally, let me also say a special welcome to our other directors of the Caribbean Corporate Governance Institute today, and to all of our friends who are joining us, in fact, today for this first online session with us. This is an excellent turnout we have here today. We have over 50 people registered, many of whom this is their first session with us. Welcome to all of you. And I am very happy now to hand over to our chairman, Mr. Nigel Romano, who will offer some words of greetings and then pass you on to Professor Bob Garrett. Nigel?
Thank you, Cam. Thank you, Kamala. And I want to thank our panelists and our presenter for again taking the time to join us for another very engaging and very important topic. Leadership, without good leadership, we are dead in the water. And the board is an integral part of ensuring that that leadership is in place. So I'm looking forward to Charlotte's presentation on director orientation and onboarding, and of course to Professor Kunneman's and Jane's contributions. And I really like to welcome both Alison and Professor Garrett, who have been a wonderful source of support and encouragement as we continue the governance journey and working to improve governance, not only in Trinidad and Tobago and the Caribbean, but all over the world. And the contribution from all over the world is amazing. And of course, I'd like to thank Camille, our sister from Jamaica, for joining us and agreeing to moderate the session today. I'm looking forward to learning, as I am committed to lifelong learning. And I'm really interested in how the discussion moves forward. So I'll hand it over to Professor Garrett to help kick us off. Thank you.
Okay. Can you hear me?
Very, very clearly.
Oh, good, because my screen is doing crazy things, but that's fine. Okay, well, good afternoon or good evening, everybody, and good morning to our host in the Caribbean. First, I'd like to thank Kamla. I have no idea where she gets the energy from, but the amount of energy she's put in, not just to this, but to the things she's planning through July, has been quite extraordinary. And she seems to be fearless. So I'm not quite sure how she managed to talk Mervyn King into fronting the session, but well done, Kamla, on that. I will say very little for a change. I'm in the most probably 2/3 of the way through writing a new book. So this month I'm head down and trying to avoid most people. The title of the book is A Shining Light in a Naughty World. And the idea of the book is to try and reposition corporate governance, not just in the financial and economic world, but in the wider issues that are currently appearing so very clearly in the COVID pandemic, and especially then thinking about our future in not just economic, but environmental and social terms. The quotation I'm using is from The Merchant of Venice, and the full quotation is, "So shines a good deed in a naughty world. Look how that little candle sends its light so full." And this is, of course, a woman's thing, because the quotation is from Portia in The Merchant of Venice. And the book, I hope, reflects as much as I can the female version of corporate governance as well as the male version. So I'll be looking to talk about that perhaps more in July, when hopefully I've written the thing and it's gone off to the publisher for them to do whatever they wish with it. But I'm delighted today we have so many women participants, and I shouldn't say any more except to say thank you everybody for participating, and let's get on with it.
And thank you. I think let's get on with it is my cue.
Exactly.
Ladies and gentlemen, it is wonderful to see so many persons here today, and I am looking forward to a truly enlightening and exciting discussion on a very important topic, director orientation and onboarding. I am Camille Facey. I'm an attorney at law, and I am sitting in Kingston, Jamaica. And without further ado, I am going to invite our presenter, Charlotte Valeur, who is the CEO of Global Governance Group and the former chairman of the Institute of Directors of the UK. Charlotte, who has over 35 years of experience in finance, primarily as an investment banker in Denmark and the UK, and who has an extensive career with a number of non-executive directorships and chair roles, including FTSE 250 companies. Charlotte, who is also the founder and chair of Board Apprentice, a not-for-profit organization set up to improve the pipeline and diversity of board-ready directors. I'd like to invite her now to share her presentation with us. Charlotte, the floor is yours.
Yeah. Hi. I am actually not seeing Charlotte on at the moment.
After my proper introduction.
Yes. I just, I'm trying to get in touch with her again, but I don't have a phone number for her. So let's just, yeah. So let's hope that we will be able to get her within the next 2 to 3 minutes, because I sent her a reminder. She in fact did share her presentation with us. So we know that she is prepared and is going to be presenting. What we have experienced in the past is the fact that sometimes our different time zones does create a little bit of challenge with persons not logging in at the appropriate time. So I just saw someone else joined us. So Christy, is that Charlotte who just joined us?
No, I don't believe so. No.
Okay.
Yes, I'm not seeing her. Well, unless we flip the script and we go with our panelists. Panelists, how do you feel about that? You know, in corporate governance, we always have to be ready.
That's true. It's a VUCA world. And the pandemic is one of the things that taught us we can't always be certain of exactly all that we have control over. So if I may ask Professor Kunneman, he in fact have spoken to us on this issue before, and we know it's one of the areas in which he is quite versed. So as much as he would have come prepared to be able to share on the presentation from Charlotte, we would be quite happy to hear his thoughts at the beginning. But before we go to him, may I just ask the person who just entered the room, I think it might be a phone number that's located on the participants list. We do ask, please, that everyone identify themselves so we know who is in the room with us. So if you need our help, please just let us know and we can rename you on the chat.
Good afternoon, everyone. I was trying to say hello and to introduce myself earlier, but I have terrible internet issues today. So my apologies. I am Catherine Abdullah from West Indian Tobacco. Lovely to be here. Sorry to be late. And I think I can change my name on my you did it already. Thank you,
yes.
Kamala. Okay then.
No problem. Yeah, let me just fix this spelling. But thank you. So at least we know too, yeah, that it's not we'll know when Charlotte joins us as well. So is Professor Kunneman able to? Yes. He's here. Professor Kunneman, would you be willing to start sharing while we wait for Charlotte to be able to join us?
Yes, Kamala, thank you very much. It is a pleasure. And it is really wonderful to see, and I really admire how you every time succeed in bringing so many so nice and interesting people together. I really admire you for that. So my congratulations. And also for the subject, every subject that you bring forward is interesting. And also this one, and especially because it is a generally neglected subject. Generally, I don't know how the experience in each of your countries is, but generally onboarding is not something that gets a lot of attention. Generally, new directors and supervisory directors, they tend to be thrown into the deep, and everybody thinks, well, you learn swimming all along. I won't try to say anything about the presentation of Charlotte, which I had the privilege to see already, but maybe I can make some preliminary remarks. Actually, in my vision, the 100, maybe 200 days around onboarding are the most important ones, both for directors and for the company. And that makes it sad that it gets so little attention relatively, and it is at the same time a huge opportunity. Actually, it is a window of opportunity. And then what's also very important, and you will see that Charlotte will pay attention to that too, is that it is important to look at it from the parties at both sides, from the perspective of the new board member, the new kid in town, and of the oldies. And they each require their own set of measures and precaution, and how you want to deal with that to get the best results. I maybe I can mention you some of the opportunities who are there. When you enter a board, you enter into a new culture, company culture, culture of people, how they behave together, how they conference together, how they make decisions together. But like all supervisory directors and directors, it is only a limited time that you have at your disposal to get a good idea. Somehow, when you look at the company where you become a director, it is as if you look through a keyhole, a very small hole, and there you see the whole room, but you see it only from a very specific perspective. And that is not only a perspective that is limited in time, because generally you are only a couple of hours in a month, and maybe in a week you are there, but it's also limited actually to the information that you get from management and also from your fellow directors. So in order to boost your success, to boost your effectivity as a director, it is of utmost importance to use those first days the best way you can. Well, how can you do that? You ask questions. Any questions are fine. There are no stupid questions. And then one of the suggestions that Charlotte will do and will discuss with us is that it's good to have a mentor, an experienced director that can be with you during the first period to introduce you. I think too, that is a very good idea. That's very important. But nevertheless, I think it would be a missed opportunity when you don't use the whole board as your mentor. So you should not be afraid to ask whatever you want to know, and also to challenge. Because, and now I come to the other part, it is also, a new board member, a great learning opportunity for the board. Often they do not realize enough, but a new person with a fresh view, with fresh ideas, that is so valuable. And it is, I think it is advisable to introduce also a form where you can give that a place. For example, when someone has been on board for 2 or 3 months, then you take a dedicated part of your meeting to ask the new board member questions. For example, what did surprise you? What did you like? Are there any things that you have seen that you yourself thought maybe could be done differently? All that kind of inquisitive questions where you as a board can learn a lot. So that's another example of the mutuality of that process, where you can both gain a lot more from a new board member. Then it is also important, and it is mentioned somewhere in the presentation of Charlotte, and actually I would like to ask her a question, but I will do that later on, but now you know the question already. Charlotte points out, among other things, she gives a lot of very useful suggestions, but she points out that it is important to share with a new board member the culture of the organization. And as Kamala knows, that is one of the subjects that intrigues me at this moment in time, because what is the culture of the organization? And more importantly, why would a board know what the culture of the organization is? Actually, in my experience, and I look forward to hear how your experience is, but in my experience, it is an issue, it is seldomly discussed or reflected upon by the board. And why I'm saying this, in order to be able to share with a new board member, well, the culture of our organization is such and so, then you need to have a clear picture of that yourselves. And that is also part of this window of opportunity. Because when you have a better picture, or you are forced to provide yourselves a better picture of your own culture and way of dealing with things and with your stakeholders, then you can also learn from the new kid in town. Then part of that, of this, and do I see it correctly that Charlotte is in the meeting now?
Yes,
okay.
Yes, we are seeing that.
If you allow me, I will shut my mouth and I will gratefully give the floor to Charlotte.
Professor Kunneman, thank you so much for those enlightening remarks. You know, you can tell you're an excellent lawyer, never at a loss for words. I too am very interested in this whole matter of culture that you have put on the table. And in Jamaica, we're focusing on that a lot. We're calling it tone at the top. And that has to be set from the board level down. So at this point in time, with our sincerest thanks to you, Professor, who I didn't introduce properly because Kamala did not allow me, you who are an authority in the international field of corporate governance, and that is why we should listen to you. You who are an experienced director and supervisory director, and we're going to ask you to explain for us in the Caribbean, especially the difference between the two. We really want to thank you for taking us over that little period. Charlotte, we have introduced you. We are so happy to have you. And you are now, the floor is now yours. And there you are. I'm so happy to see you. Welcome.
Thank you so much.
We sent out a missing person alert for you.
No, I'm terribly sorry. I was in the kitchen eating toast, believing that I was not on for another hour. So I got the timing wrong. I'm terribly sorry about that.
No, welcome.
Thank you so much for having me here today. I really, really appreciate that. It's always great to be part of your events that has great people in it. And I learned so much from hearing from a lot of the other speakers, as well as from the questions that your delegates are asking. Now, I have a presentation I go by. Do I share that or do you share that?
I think she's saying you share that. I
You,
saw it.
yeah, you can let us know. If you want to share, Charlotte, that's fine. If you would like us to do it for you, that's not a problem too.
I've got it here.
Okay, good.
So I will share it here. I just need to make sure I share it in the right way.
So we're seeing it.
I was hoping I could get it to fill the whole screen. It doesn't do that.
If you go down to the bottom, Charlotte, at the very bottom.
Yeah.
Keep going down straight across to, and there's a little box. Keep going right down to the almost right. Stop. Left. Go left. No. Back. One more back. Next one. The next one. Yeah. Press that one.
That's great. I'm clearly the older generation who's not very good with this.
Oh, no, you haven't seen me yet.
Yes. I just learned how to do that too. Thank you.
Oh, gosh. Yeah, sorry about this, everybody. So I'm going to be talking about direct orientation and onboarding today. I've based a lot of it on experience I have had myself over the 15 years of being a director of a number of different boards, but also with the boards I work with around board general governance advice, but also doing board reviews with and seeing and hearing from directors what they like to see. And also we have done within Global Governance Group a survey with our global network of directors, and part of that survey included something around onboarding that I've brought into this today. So from my perspective, when you have new directors coming on that you want to onboard, it really is something you have to these days consider very closely. The spotlight is really on the boardrooms because everything continues to sort of intensify. And I think generally boards are rolling in many ways. When I started 15 years ago, I was thinking this is a really slow moving train, but actually it's not terribly slow moving anymore. You know, we have people that are pushing in with different ways of doing things all the time, including myself. And some of it is landing in the boardroom and actually being taken on. Part of that is this much broader group of kind of directors that you have onto boards, which can make it more difficult to onboard when you come onto a board if you're very different from the group of people who's already there. So as we see more women, more ethnic minorities, different kind of executives, I mean, we are in the early days of discussing onboarding employees to boards, which is something I have been used to from Scandinavia. We have a law that requires that to happen. But in many other countries, or most other countries, that isn't what is happening. But an onboarding process should be taking into account that one day you might have also or should have employee representation on board. So I think the broader group as well of expertises that we are asking for example, technology requires us to take younger people, for example, and again, they might not have had the time in their executive career to already report into boards and therefore understand inherently what goes on. So that I think requires that we are really taking this pretty seriously, because the end result is that we are appointing directors that hasn't got that experience serving on boards already until we start sorting that at the corporate level, and certainly not on public boards either, or even reporting into a board. And I think we need to take those challenges up front. And this is about not only recruiting the right director, but ensuring that we put the right director in the right situation, because you can have the right person, but if you don't get them onto the board in the right way, it can all go a bit pear-shaped quickly. And I see from experience that quite often onboarding programs fall short of what they should be. So this is really sort of a little bit of a pet of mine to actually ensure that this is done in the correct way. So I think some of the problems as well for existing board members could be that when they entered the boardroom, they had already sort of been helped along the way, and they came into a setting with people that were like them, and therefore made it all a lot easier. But that is just not quite the luxury we have today. So I think onboarding is very much a two-way street. As you see in this slide, it's a two-way street in that it's both, there's an onus on the new director to speak up and for the board and the company to deliver. So for the new director, before hopefully even they start applying for board, they need to sort of study certain things. So they have the basic insight into, for me, into corporate governance, strategic thinking, and how to read accounts. So once you are appointed to a board, then you should certainly study all public disclosures, websites, anything you can find. And there's a lot of information that we can glean now that wasn't quite there 15 years ago when I started, but then you would just ask for a list of the various papers that you wanted to have. You know, read at least the last 3 to 5 years of annual reports so that you understand the history of the company as well. And then try to look through the reports with an observer's eye into seeing what issues in governance might there be within this organization that maybe you would like to address or that should be addressed. A lot of that is often fairly clear from the annual report. But you could, of course, go onto a board that actually hasn't got any public annual reports. And then you must ask for as many papers as you feel is necessary from the company itself. At the end of it, I put consider board maturity level fit with own level. This is something the next slide will talk to a little bit more. But this is something I've been, again, observing over the years and seeing certain patterns that seem to indicate that the board maturity level and your own maturity, sort of leadership maturity level, if you don't have a fit there, that could be problematic. So it's good to try to have that in advance. So on the board side, obviously provide insights on any public disclosures that's out there. Sometimes you might feel that you don't need to provide everything, but it would be quite good actually, for example, with a pack that consists of anything that had come out publicly, and then share and provide this deep dive on non-public materials. Obviously, as soon as you've hired a director and they have signed the agreement, that is completely possible and should happen. At least the last year's board meeting minutes and budgets and so forth, more if the director wishes so. But at least that is pretty important for the board and the company to offer. The general insight into culture and values and the specific dynamics of the board can be maybe difficult to give to a new director, especially dynamics, because who's going to give them that? Is that coming from the directors themselves or from someone who's observing directors at play? But there could be certain dynamics that are very valuable to know before you go in and start serving on the board and getting yourself into the gist of everything. You won't always have time to glean that yourself, because these days I have experienced now a number of times to basically be thrown into the deep end, and you either swim or sink, right? So you got to really be prepared to work in a very uncertain territory where you actually don't really know where the different roads are, and just get on with it. Maybe even more so as a chair. And that's certainly something I've observed a couple of times, where there is no real handover and there is no real induction other than what you can find yourself. And you just have to go in and hold yourself. And I'm sure I'm not the only chair who has experienced that. And then obviously they do need to make sure that you get introduced to key executives and management team, and site visits, if there are any sites to visit, are very, very useful in the early days for sure. So this is the slide around the vertical leadership maturity I've been talking about a lot over the last sort of year and a half, because from my point of view, it does have a real influence in how well you can operate with the board. This is research that started back in the 1950s with a chap called Claire Graves, and it was then built upon into something we call spiral dynamics. And I use it to ascertain where the different leadership levels are. You can use it on a personal level, on an organizational level, or on a country level, where you have the first three levels, red, orange, and yellow, are sort of fairly sort of self-orientated, if you want. You haven't really gone in to your leading in a way where it kind of evolves still around the self. So self on your own, self in a group, and self in an organization. And when you go up to the green, blues, turquoise, it moves into a more group situation where you're analyzing yourself and the group, and where it becomes more making other people successful and less about how does it benefit the self. And the very highest level, purple, is not very many people operate at that level. Once you have moved up through the different colors, you can easily move back down again. But if you haven't moved up, you can't jump up. So there is where the problem lies, in that the red, orange, and yellow is it's indicated that about 80% of the world population is operating at red, orange, and yellow. And it's kind of cognitive development, if you want, or insights. But we're thinking that the millennials are coming in around a green, and which, as you can think of, within the next 5 to 10 years, will have more than 50% of the population, of voters, of buyers, of talent, operating from green into blues, where maybe my generation and older is still operating at reds, yellow and orange. So that means that if you look at something as, for example, diversity, so the reaction to diversity from the red, yellow and orange would be, why do we need that? There isn't an inherent understanding of why that's necessary and what it does. So it needs a lot of sort of research backing this and that before they can embrace even the thought of natural diversity, where when you come in from the green and up, the why is not asked, it's only the how. So this is just a small sort of difference but you can see how that works. If you get onto a board that operates at, let's say, greens and blues, and you operate at reds or orange, then when you have conversations, you will kind of go past each other. So through some of the things that you read about the board and conversations, you can get a feeling for where those differences are, and then ensure that actually the conversations you might have with the boards will function in a way so that you can as a team come together. And then think about the overall board as a team and the organization. Where do they operate in terms of that cognitive development? So that's one I have added to that not that many people are looking at, but I have seen again and again that directors or CEOs, for example, who come in and operate at different levels to the board, get squeezed in a way and finds it very difficult to settle in. If you, for example, have a CEO that operates at red, orange or yellow with a board that operates at green or blue, is almost certain to get fired within a short amount of years. Whereas the other way around, it should be easier because the CEO can come down the steps and work at the same level as where the board is, and therefore is more likely to survive longer in that organization. So that was a little sort of extra add. I don't want to spend too much time on that now. So the next piece I have is around recommendations that were made, and these recommendations is something that's based on this survey that we did with a number of directors. And on the first one, we are talking about whether the directors were sort of happy with the onboarding experience and what they would want more of it. So on that, about 65% of the directors we surveyed were generally satisfied with their onboarding, but more than 20% reported to us that they received no onboarding at all, which led us to the recommendation to say that a formalized and structured onboarding program enable new directors to understand onboarding expectations and proactively identify potential gaps. So it's quite important that there is a formalized and structured onboarding program in place. It's something I feel is very much the directors and the board's responsibility to ensure that. It's often passed over to the company secretary if there is a specific company secretary dealing with a broader group of things to do for the board. It's often passed over to them to ensure that it is then happening, but actually having the proper procedure in place needs to spring from the board, and it also needs to be updated on a regular basis, because what you needed to know 15 years ago is not the same as what you needed to know 10 years ago or even 5 years ago. So I think we need to be very clear. I mean, within the last couple of years, more and more so, for example, sustainability has come in as a very integrated part, or increasingly integrated part, of what any organization does. So I think there should be specific focus around sustainability, but also the culture we talked about before, to ensure that the directors, when they start being in meetings, fully understand what the organization is doing around, for example, sustainability. Let's talk about the UN sustainability goals, which is what most of the boards I work with are now reporting against. That directors understand how that works, how that is incorporated into strategic discussions, into pretty much anything that goes on the agenda. This is not quite the case with all boards yet, but that is certainly where we should be going. The next one, recommendation 2, where we were talking about the meetings. What we were hearing back from directors was that their onboarding programs included meetings with certainly the CEO, the independent chair or lead director, the CFO, corporate secretary, and maybe other executives such as like technology officer, chief human resources officer, and after they have been appointed to the board. I think these meetings, as what we had reported back, would frequently consider the most valuable component, or one of the most valuable components of the onboarding experience, because that's where you really have a good chance to ask questions and have a conversation about what goes on. So it's very important to get those meetings set up and actually happening. So, but they did say, whilst meeting with other directors was also highly valued, only a minority of the survey directors reported meeting with directors as part of the induction. That was a really sort of disappointing response to see coming back, because you're thinking surely meeting with each of the other directors would be key to onboarding someone and having those one-to-ones. We know that time out of the boardroom is important, but we should also know the time before the boardroom is important, before you even enter it. And that's, again, back to the owners and directors. Actually, they might feel, well, we've gone through the entire process of interviewing, blah, blah, blah. So, we've said what should be said, but it's very different conversations to have once you have actually hired someone to whilst you're interviewing them. So therefore, directors should step up and ensure that they all have individually a meeting with any new director that comes in before they start working, or certainly around the first board meeting for sure. So that led to our second recommendation, that meetings with the executive team, key senior managers, and all other directors, and this is an important part of it, should be a core component of all onboarding programs. For recommendation 3, we have information on the company strategies, financials being another sort of highly valued and generally standard part of our survey directors onboarding, which is good to see. It's almost as if this was the easier one to sort of fulfill. So most directors we surveyed received a sort of an overview of the company strategies on a historical and forward-looking basis. Materials provided sort of frequently included strategic plans, board books, historical board information, and financial information. And from the one service, we had over half received briefings, or just over half received briefings on company investors or visited company operations. That should ideally be, if you have any investors in a company, you should always have briefings on those very early on. It's not something you should wait to pick up as you get into. It's something we need to provide as boards upfront to any new director. And most of the directors said that onboarding would have been enhanced by even more information that they received during the onboarding, which leads us to recommendation 3. More rather than less should be the guiding principles. We're always a bit scared of just overwhelming people with lots. But when you go on as a director, you are coming in there with your full personal liability. And it would be a shame if you haven't got all the opportunities available to know as much as you can to make the right kind of decisions and challenge in the appropriate way. And I think that's worth bearing in mind, that from what we hear from directors, they would be happy to receive more rather than less, because then they can choose what to read or not read. If they don't even get it, we made the choice for them. So recommendation 4 is around directors finding value in being assigned more experienced mentors, talked about before. Several people wanted really to, if they could have a mentor on the board or board buddy or whatever we want to call it, but someone who can talk to them before or after the meetings and just be that person to go to if there's something you're not quite sure of. And then I think it's quite important to specifically give a specific director who will see, okay, this, I'm dealing with this, and stays in contact with that new director, at least for the first year. I think what we used to have, where directors could come in and maybe take 6, maybe even 12 months to settle in, isn't really happening so much anymore. You come in and you're expected to be an active part of whatever goes on the agenda from the first meeting, or they might get a bit of a leeway on the first meeting, but then it's really expected that you would come in and do something there. We had only 12% of the directors we talked about have a mentor on the board, but the majority of them said that they would value some kind of board mentor, whatever it might be. The final one is around the committees, where a strong recommendation is that new directors should attend all committee meetings, also the committees they're not part of, in the first year, because that will accelerate the understanding of the company and the board. And it really is something that we had back from the survey, that a lot of the directors said that this was actually a real hands-on experience. And it was again coming in the top of the things that they found useful to being up to speed as soon as they started serving on the board. So I have added in an onboarding checklist, and we have a lot of the things that I have already mentioned, but it might just help people think about what should be in there. A lot of it you would think, well, it's pretty, as with all governance, it's common sense, right? It's the kind of things that new directors should see, but sometimes it's good if you have it written up and there's a checklist and there's something someone can go by, as opposed to having to think it all up. And this is really something that should come to board maybe not every year, but every couple of years, to just go over and see, do we have the right things on the list? And then I have another one with practicalities, where you go over the various roles and responsibilities, the board portal, if you have one, where the board papers come out, and the various committee activities, compensation, all the sort of more practical stuff. But that is, again, quite important for you to actually really settle in, or for any new director to really settle in, and you as the other board directors being sure that they are getting through the right thing. Finally, as a conclusion from our point of view, is, since space is limited in the boardroom, really successfully integrating new talent and perspective is critical. It's not just about the new director learning, but it's also about the existing directors and executives learning about the new director, where we have opportunities to share and bring ourselves to the table, so that people understand who they're in front of in the meeting. I heard a board was saying that they started with a new chair, and that new chair brought them together and said, let's make introductions. And you would normally say, okay, 5 minutes each. An hour later, that the chair was still making introduction and talking a lot about their own life and experiences, and then passing it over to another director to do exactly the same at length. And that was a really different experience for the new director on that board, because what she said was that actually, in an instant, she knew the whole board and the people there much, much more than what she had done on other boards for years, because actually she got to see and hear something about their family background and other things that wouldn't normally come out. So for me, the best boards recognize that formalized onboarding program is key, and that they know that the best onboarding programs require a commitment from both the board and also from the new director. Thank you.
Charlotte, thank you so very much for that. I mean, I have so many questions, but before we get into them, including I can see some big differences between what happens in Europe and, say, what happens here in the Caribbean. But Jane, are you with us? It would, okay.
Yeah.
Hold on. We are on. Let's read the comments together. This is from Kamla. She's our boss. Oh, we don't have to worry about the time so much. Okay, so I can, because I was just about to start corralling everybody.
Maybe I was faster than I should have been.
No, you did brilliantly, right? So let's go to Jane and then come back to Professor Kunneman. Is that okay, Frank? Thank you. All right. See how I'm forward? I'm leaving off the professor and just calling you Frank. Is that okay? Okay. So Jane joined the GCC Board of Directors Institute, which is based in Dubai, in January 2016 as the executive director. She has over 15 years of international experience in corporate governance, working with boards of directors. She's an accredited corporate governance trainer with the International Finance Corporation, which is part of the World Bank Group, and is an accredited trainer with the Ethics Institute, as well as being a certified ethics officer. So, Jane, what would you like to share with us? What can you add to what we've already heard?
Thank you, Camille. It's lovely to be with you and to listen to Charlotte and Professor Kunneman before that as well. But I'm actually recently joined the board of a not-for-profit company, and I am going through exactly what you don't want to go through, because the onboarding process has been the complete opposite of what Charlotte has just described. And I think, therefore, it's very fresh in my mind at the moment that this is something that is generally not well done anywhere in the world, I suspect, and not in the Gulf either. In this region, onboarding is practically non-existent. There are exceptions, right? The worst, of course, is just the document dump, if you get one. And of course, the best is the description that Charlotte has described. And I think, but what I am seeing is that there is a recognition, it's a small light, that is where people are seeing that if they really want to get value out of a new board director, then a good induction onboarding process is absolutely essential. And that is not something that just happens in one day. I think it happens over a period of time, and it over a period of months, maybe, with meetings, presentations, site visits, suitable reading and continuous updates, as Charlotte has described. I think that what I think, and Charlotte has really said, is that the board is a strategic asset, and you've got so few seats around the table. Why would you not want to really do everything you possibly could to get value out of this new director that you're bringing on board by, giving them all the information they need so they can hit the ground running? It doesn't make sense really, but I think people just don't think about it or focus on it properly. I think it works both ways. While it's the role of the chairman, with the assistance, obviously, of the corporate secretary or the board secretary to get the induction program or to induct a new director, I believe. I think ultimately it's also the new director's responsibility as well. And so for example, what I've been doing is having had a chat with the CEO, he's now given me permission to reach out to all the executive team, and that was extremely valuable. I've now asked, as Charlotte has said, if I could be an observer on the different committees, and that's going to happen, I assume. But I've already had 3 board meetings, and so the value that I've given to those board meetings is either limited, or I've been asking stupid questions because I need the information and I haven't been getting it. So I think the value of induction is huge, and it's a very frustrating experience not to get the information that you really need, I think, in an organization. So I think that's it. And I like the idea of the buddying and the mentoring, and I've actually been reaching out myself to buddy up with other board directors in order to try and increase my knowledge and skills. So I think induction is hugely important, and we are seeing some changes in this region where people are reaching, boards are reaching out to us saying it's a requirement in the regulations, but we know that we don't know how to do it. So could you help us put in a board induction program? And one of the things that we're often recommending here is that at least once a year, if they're not doing it, they have a board, a board offsite or a board dinner or a board workshop. And it's a great time to onboard a new director, is to get everybody together, make it a social occasion as well, so that you can share those personal experiences and get to know your fellow directors. And maybe there's some training about the corporate governance framework of the organization, the culture and how it works, as well as maybe some updates on the latest trends in that business. So an evening dinner followed by a full day workshop when you're onboarding new directors and getting to know them, it would be great, I think, and that's what we often recommend. Camille, do you want us to talk about the director development side, the professional development side now as well?
Yes, I think we could. And Jane, tell me, were you the only person who joined the board at this particular time as a new director, or was there any?
No, there were 2 others, but they come from the industry sector.
Okay.
All right, and therefore they're quite comfortable with the industry sector, whereas I came on as an independent and as a corporate governance expert. So I need a little bit more onboarding about the sector and the business, but I'm learning fast. But nevertheless, I think that maybe they're quite comfortable, but I'm not. I need more information about what's.
Yeah, and I think, Charlotte, you kind of alluded to that, because one of the questions I was going to ask you was whether or not each onboarding process had to be an individualized process, which is kind of what Jane is alluding to. In other words, in law, we have the concept of the eggshell principle. You have to take your whoever it is as you find them. So similarly, your directors, you have to see what level your director is at in order to properly design their onboarding program, which would mean individualize things. Charlotte, were you saying that?
Absolutely. I think you absolutely have to individualize or try to tailor it to the different directors, but you would have like a skeleton, a core, if you know, sort of the spine of what should be in everything. For all directors, because even if someone is an experienced director, they're not experienced in that organization specifically. So there are certain things, no matter how much experience, and it's not really, for me, it's not even about experience, right? But some people feel slightly aggrieved if we say that they need to learn something. So we have to come around it in a way where they can embrace it. But this is very company specific, and I think there are company specific things that everybody needs to go through, and it's really also a get to know each other exercise, and you can only do that when you engage in it. The days where we went into the boardroom to eat the sandwiches and then leave again, they're gone, or they should be gone. If they're not, we need to move them on, right? No, you come in and you're part of a team, not just of the board, but you're there to serve an organization. And you need to learn about the depths of the organization and the different levels of people working there too. Everything is not just in the boardroom, it's also outside of the boardroom. I mean, going on site visits, for example, I'm on the board of a large construction company called Langeroo Construction, and we do large infrastructure projects like nuclear power stations, what have you. We were sent out to the different areas where they were building to see exactly how does it go on in this organization, to speak to the project manager, to speak to some of the builders, to understand partly also the culture of that organization. There was no limit to who we could speak to or meet. We could speak to anyone, and we can at any time say, I want to go and see this, and we go and see it on our own or as a board. And those are the kind of things for everybody that should be available for everybody. Being a board member is not just hiking up to the board meetings. It's more than that. If you want to do a good job, right? Often not for profit. It's also meeting volunteers, seeing what kind of services are we delivering, how are they delivered, come and observe it and be part of it. And directors should wish to do so. If it's not offered, they should ask for it, but it should be offered up front.
Right. And in the Caribbean, we have issues between going across that divide where you're now being seen as getting into operational issues. And I think as well that in the Caribbean, very often we really have not grasped the concept of personal liability, full personal liability. And therefore, that's why we perhaps are not as careful about getting the information we ought to get.
Yeah, it's when you go deeper into an organization, you get the real information of what goes on the shop floor.
Yes. Professor Kunneman, can we ask you, Jane, are you through? Or you're asking whether you would add anything else?
Happy to talk about, professional director development, because I think that was the other half of the topic, wasn't it? I was looking at onboarding as well as development.
Okay, director orientation and onboarding is so.
Okay, no, let Professor Kunneman carry on, and I'll come back later.
Professor Kunneman.
Yeah, thank you very much. And Charlotte, thank you very much. And also Jane for sharing your very valuable insights and thoughts with us. It's really very interesting. And Charlotte, what you shared with us is also very insightful, and you gave a lot of very good suggestions. And there was no time, or there seemed not to be enough time to look at all those what you call technical advices, but some of them are very valuable actually. And I think that a short list like that can be very helpful to all kinds of organizations. Well, then if I may, because I've told already too much, but if I may, I would like to ask one or two questions to Charlotte and maybe also to Jane. Charlotte, I think it's your second slide where you mentioned that the board has to provide insight about culture and also about board dynamics. And that interests me very much because I don't know how it is in your part of the world, but with us, one of the most challenging things is insight in how you are doing it yourselves. Yeah. So, for example, when you discuss boardroom dynamics, I'm a lawyer and I earn a lot of money with issues in boards, and often the chair is failing there because many chairs, and mostly it's male chairs, they think they are God or above God. And how can you ask someone who is like that to share with a newbie how the board dynamic is? He won't tell, well, I determine everything what happens and you should keep your mouth shut. That's not what he will say. So it's difficult to get an idea about boardroom dynamics, and maybe you can reflect on that.
Yeah. So from my point of view, if the board functions, which of course not all boards do, they would have regular board reviews. And in those reviews, there should generally be a review also of dynamics of the board, so you can glean something from that. When I do board reviews, I would generally do a long report for the board only, and then a summary report for public consumption. And I think you could ask for the last two ones that has been given or done, and then be able to read those. The other good place to get it from is from the company secretary, who's observing the board at play all the time. Obviously, they are looking for the new board member to fit in and have often been, again, watching and working with the board for years. So they would have good insights into those were the places I would go, to board reviews and to the company secretary. And as you say, it's difficult to sort of assess yourself. So you might not get the proper picture of what actually does go on here. You can generally see it from how the board meetings are conducted pretty quickly. You can generally feel the room relatively quickly, but it might take longer than you wish for it to do. So I would definitely try to speak, maybe even with each individual director about that. Ask, 5 questions about dynamics in the boardroom. So who leads, who's more dominant than others, who talks more, who talks less, different personalities that you might find, and ask specifically into that in the meetings with the individual directors. This is why those meetings are also so important.
Yeah, very interesting. And then if I may ask Jane, and also you, Charlotte. Jane, you mentioned the not-for-profit foundations, and you had a theory, and actually I completely sustain that theory, that there practically is no onboarding process in that kind of organizations. So the set of recommendations that Charlotte gave, they are, I think very good, but most foundations are not in that stage. So maybe it would be interesting to develop a separate way of how to deal with induction in these kind of organizations. And my idea, maybe you can reflect on that, is also that having board experience, most people where I come from, they struggle to build that up. There are not so many positions available. Many people have aspirations, but how can they get the relevant experience? It's difficult. And the not-for-profits are great as to experience how it works. But then you need to have attention for that too. Maybe Jane, you can reflect on that.
So I think you're absolutely right, Professor Kunneman, but I think, you know, what we say in corporate governance is that there is no one size that fits all. And just like, you know, for-profit companies, you have a whole variety of different types of not-for-profits, from the very small ones with more like associations or networks to some of the really big charities, you know, like Oxfam, whoever, which really function, they do function as a company. We ourselves at the GCC Board Directors Institute, we're not for profit, but we're a company and we function in every respect like a small business. So I think you need to adapt, you know, your governance structures and your onboarding process to the type of organization that you are. But I still think the same principles apply and the same processes apply. And having a governance framework and the clarity around it is really important. And actually, in a way, it's even more important for a not-for-profit if you think about it, because they're definitely using donors' money and being able to, you know, account for that, be responsible for it, and the same principles exactly apply. And I think, as Charlotte said before, at the end of the day, it's common sense as well. It seems to me anyway, but clearly it's not always, is it? So I think that the same principles apply for me for not-for-profits. It's just the way you maybe tailor it for them. But you know, you still need to understand what is the regulatory framework, what are their policies and procedures, what is the culture, you know, how does the board function, who are the people around the table, how do they relate to management and oversee management, and all exactly the same things. It's just in a slightly different context and with people around the table who hopefully are all there for the right reasons. They want to do good, they want to do well, I think, but maybe don't necessarily have the structure or the framework that's required very often. So
I agree with that. It's absolutely the same framework. I think it doesn't really matter what board, what country, what organization. The principles of all boards have accounts, all boards have legal documents. So that's a lot of things. All boards have stakeholders. All boards have hopefully risk management. So I mean, it's the same things we deal with no matter what organization. It might be the detailed framework around it is different, but the principles are the same. I did launch a not-for-profit initiative in 2013 called Board Apprentice, where we collaborate with boards to offer a seat at the table for a year to observe the board at work. So no matter how old you are, you can still learn, right? We're all for lifelong learning, I hope, because we're never too old to learn. So you will basically be in the boardroom for a year as a net, receive the board packs, be in the meetings, be in the dinners, everything. And then once you've done that, you know very clearly what is, you know, what does it mean to be a board member? And we have seen that a number of not-for-profit has actually started sort of using it almost as a recruitment process. So they get, we work this because of diversity, to develop diverse board members and for boards to develop for their own succession planning within diversity. But actually they have their apprentices for a year and they get to really like them, and then they hire them as a board member. By then you have always almost, this was not the intention, by the way, but it happens. It's almost like try before you buy. If you want, but that was not really. Now for diversity, it's more like field training for directors. If let's say you have an all-female board getting a male coming in, maybe they learn something from that, or when you get different ethnic backgrounds, younger people, different skills, and they're with you for a year, you learn from them in a way you couldn't learn in any other way. And 78% of our apprentices become board members within a year, so they learn a lot from it. It's kind of only boards can give them that experience. We're also franchise, so we can set up in any country anyone wants us to do very quickly.
Okay, thanks for that, Charlotte. Thank you, Professor. Thank you, Jane. All your comments were so insightful. I want to say to our 50 or 40 odd participants on that there is a chat, so you can put your questions in the chat and we will be opening to participants in a little while. When you spoke, Charlotte, about hiring directors, so for that concept for me in the Caribbean is a little strange, I would say, because essentially you ask persons to serve on your board. Compensation is minimal. And so the question often arises as to how much time that person is actually, who has said yes, prepared to invest. Because especially if it's a younger person, they're still working, they have a full-time job, and there is so much that they really ought to learn. So one of my queries would be, and perhaps it's different in your side of the world to how it is here, is do you find your directors willing to invest the kind of time that they really need to invest in order to be as knowledgeable as they need to be? As I mentioned, I don't think many of our directors understand the extent of their liability. So in the Caribbean, the first thing we really have to do is to take everybody in a room to say, these are the laws, this is the Companies Act. Or if it's public sector, I think the obligations are the same. So to your point, Frank, I don't necessarily think we should have a different onboarding process for public sector where they're dealing with taxpayers' money, or the not-for-profit where they're dealing with, contributions, versus a listed company where they're dealing with shareholders' money, or even a private company. So I think the rules should be the same. But what is clearly coming out to me is there is, I think, a different methodology of getting boards, Charlotte, where you are, board members, to say where we are in the Caribbean.
I think it's right that different countries probably do have different methodologies. I've done some work in Bermuda and in Cayman Island, where we have in fact worked to launch board apprentices in both places, and there might be not I think directors kind of know, but they've been able to get around for so many years, and none of us really end up having to pay. And I think this is where the difference is starting to come in, that I think there will be having to be set some examples of how directors will be held to account and will possibly have to really pay up for the mistakes that they made, in ways if it's regulated boards where they can't get covered, certainly in certain countries, for the first £400,000, for example, in the UK from a regulator if you haven't done what you need to do. So I think it seems to still have, being a board member still seems to have some kind of glory around it, right? And people want it, and it looks nice. And many people was like, oh, well, when we get to a certain stage in life, then we will. I'm still hearing a lot of that. But while you have professional directors, people holding themselves out to be a director as a professional director on different boards, if you're not up to scratch and willing to spend the time you spend, from my point of view, then you're not on any of my boards. Or if the majority of the board is like that, then I'm not on that board. So I think we as directors can influence for this very strongly through having our own values in place in terms of what will we take part of. I mean, before I join a board, I will do diligence every single board member myself, because I'm not willing to share my personal unlimited liabilities and the prosperity of my children potentially if I can't pay for their education, right, with someone who doesn't want to spend enough time. So we are also, I think it's our duty to speak up on the boards where you might have directors not spending enough time, say, actually, if you haven't got time, can you not? I mean, I had it recently with one board where I had to say to someone, look, if you have no one else to like look after your child or whatever, then maybe you shouldn't join the meetings, and maybe you haven't got time to fit in. And I had a discussion with him around that, and that was, it was what it was. But when you have board meeting, it's important. Board meetings are important meetings, and we have to take them as that. Be prepared for them, and be prepared to spend the time it takes to be prepared. Or be prepared to have me in their face.
Yes, yeah, I think that is definitely an issue we have to deal with in the Caribbean. Participants, you can put your questions in the chat, or you can raise your hand. We'd be happy to hear any other voices, especially on this topic now as to how it is. It's almost a gulf, Charlotte, when you are describing what is required. And Jane, compared to what actually happens very often. You know, it's even when you give persons the packs, the board packs, they're kind of like, oh, all of this, when am I to read this? So you literally have to bring them in a room, put them there and say, okay, these are the terms of reference. This is the board charter. Because again,
part of the induction, right? That they get told this. The board packs are generally X amount of pages, you know, 200 or whatever it might be, or 600, you never know. But this is the time you expected to spend on it before and after and during. And if it needs to be spelled out like that, then it needs to be spelled out like that before they sign the dotted line, right?
Mm-hmm.
But I think
Camille, could I ask a question of Charlotte, which really is around, because often when you're doing onboarding, if you have a new executive director, they often feel they don't need to go through the process because they feel that they know the company. And when I've been involved in doing onboarding and induction, I've then found that I've had a challenge trying to get them engaged by saying, you need to have an induction, but it will be different from the one that the non-execs have had, because you need to learn a bit more about what it means to be a director rather than what it means to be a manager. Yeah. So I don't know if you
have the same liabilities
that you would like to share.
I think that it needs to be made clear to them, Alison, that they have the same kind of liabilities as a director. Once they become a board member, it's a different thing, right? And then that liability increases. They don't have the insurance cover in the same way as they have as an executive. It becomes something else, and they need to fully understand that. And if they're unwilling to spend the necessary time, then maybe that needs to be reported to the board, and the board needs to say, sorry, you're not a director. And then they need to have a discussion of whether they should even be an executive. So it's a different discussion. If someone hasn't got the time for that, you go into a different conversation, and that needs to be made clear from my point of view. But I'm a bit black and white on that, right? You either spend the time or you don't spend the time. And I'm not willing to be around people who will not spend the time, whether it's not for profit, you know, public, private, whatever it is. I'm not willing to do that.
Jonathan, Charlotte, I agree with you completely. Jonathan.
Yeah. Hi. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Jonathan Yearwood. I'm from Guyana. One of the problems we have here is when we change a government, a lot of our state-owned companies change an entire board. So you're talking about onboarding directors. My worry is, how do you onboard an entire board where a new government takes over and the entire board that was functioning at that point is now dismissed or their contract is up, and the new government installs an entirely new board? And how do you foresee onboarding an entire board when there's no continuation as such?
It's an interesting, thank you for that question, Jonathan. It's something I have experienced a couple of times. Sorry, Camilla.
No, go ahead, Charlotte.
I've spent a couple of times working around the world, in Africa as well, for example. Same thing there, where you get new boards with new governments. It's something that ideally the government has an awareness around and try to ensure that their officials actually have some of the training that Jane was looking to talk about, director development, as part of their when they go on as civil servants or politicians, they will get that training. So I've done governance training of a group of African ministers, for example, in Rwanda a couple of years ago, to go over, you know, all the topics in the boardroom you need to know. You could give them a pretty good overview in a 1 or 2 day course, like about the applied governance. But if they know nothing and you have to go back to basics around this is a set of accounts and this is the corporate governance code, it will take a lot longer. But if it's around when you're at the table here are some things that you need to be concerned with, is possible to do in a day's time or so. But it can be tricky, and they have to understand what it means to do that. And I would try in your country, if that's possible at all, to maybe propose that that there are some non-execs that are not government people as part of that board. Is it 25% or 35, 40, whatever a percentage, where you have some continuity for that organization to be run in a more continued way. And I know this is difficult, but again, as professional directors in your country, these are exactly the kind of things you can come together with a voice on and say, actually, we would like to propose this, because that will be better for these organizations that serve all of us, because often what you have is the utilities and stuff like that, are the state-owned entities. So that's what I would propose to start pushing, but also say you actually do need to have a program in place for these directors that come on
yes,
short notice.
Charlotte, you've hit the nail on the head. And what we've done in Jamaica is we have now, we have regulations before Parliament that require that 1/3 of the board remain in place, irrespective of who, of any change of government. Of course, it should have been passed a year ago. The Senate, it got passed through the lower house. The upper house refused. They've made modifications, and it is back going through the process again. But we've been pushing for it from the Chamber of Commerce and the private sector, because, as you say, we, the public, are impacted by this issue, and therefore we have a right to speak out about it. So, Jonathan, you can certainly look at what we're doing in Jamaica. Jacqueline has posted a question. Having seen both sides of the board table as management and as a director, I do have some level of discomfort with the concept of a board body. I think it could lead to cliques in the boardroom. I am more comfortable with information coming from chair, the senior independent director, the managing director, or the corporate secretary.
I'm hearing that, but the board body could be the chair.
Say that again, please.
The board body could, yeah.
The board body could be the chair.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Having seen the way boards function, and the way, I suppose, directors can get into groups where they sort of share common opinions or have side discussions in the boardroom, one does feel a little uncomfortable with sort of encouraging that. So yes, I agree. The board body should be the chair, or maybe even the managing director or the corp sec, but trying to sort of encourage people to get into little groups to discuss and share your opinions and views, I think could lead to a dysfunctional board at the end of the day. So that would have been my concern.
And absolutely, I'm hearing what you're saying, and it does happen that you get these cliques, and you also have conversations going on in smaller groups. People have agreed something before they come into the boardroom. Let's face it, I think we've all experienced that too. And that's absolutely not what it's meant to be. It's simply for the first 6 to 12 months, that's all, to have someone that the new director can go to specifically to ask specific questions, not to clique up in any way, but it's that support mainly.
Yes, Frank. You were saying you're indicating, Frank, you wanted to add. You unmute yourself, Frank.
That was an excellent question of Jacqueline, actually. But I think it should not be either or. I think you should prevent a situation where onboarding and onboarding process with a new director is the responsibility of one body only, and then everybody can just do what they want. I think it's very important to accept that the onboarding process is really a process of everybody, where everybody is involved. So I don't really would object to having a body for a period of time, 6 or 12 months. But then, and Jacqueline is right there, you should also have a chair that feels that responsibility, and a managing director, and all the other board members that also are engaged in that process. And then you prevent, I think, the situation that Jacqueline fears.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Okay, not seeing any more questions in the chat. Or, oh, yes, who's that?
I was just going to share with you Jacqueline's question that I lived in Mauritius for a long time. It was very similar there, change of government, whole new, and complete waste of money, complete inefficiency, all the expertise and all the knowledge is gone and you start all over again. You throw the baby out with the bathwater, as they say. And one of the things that we were trying to implement there was this notion of having independent directors, not nominee directors, or at least a third of the board being independent directors, as you've mentioned, for Jamaica. And also looking at the system that they have in New Zealand, where any citizen, providing they're qualified, can nominate, can go into a pool of people who would be nominated onto boards of state-owned enterprises, basically. So a system whereby anybody in the country could actually put their name forward, and providing they meet the qualification criteria that have been laid out, could be considered to be one of those. And there's a sort of independent board that would select and nominate for the state-owned enterprises. Now, it didn't happen in Mauritius because they no doubt had a change of government and, that never got onto the table. So you're making much more progress in Jamaica. But I think it's worth having a look at the system in New Zealand because clearly different context perhaps, but nevertheless island nation, and interesting to see how it can work as well.
Yeah. We have that as part of our new regulations here as well. There's a database and the government ministers are supposed to draw from that pool. Right. And anybody can put their name in as long as you are qualified, especially if you have gone through like director training programs, etc. So we're trying to get there as well. We just need them to actually pass the regulations. Good Jonathan, you were weighing in again? Yes, Jonathan.
And you also have a question from Liz as well, right? Her hand is
okay. Up. Oh yeah, there, Liz. Yes, I'm sorry. I'm being a little prejudiced. You see, the yellow hand against the black is brighter than your little flesh-colored hand. Go, Liz. You go first.
All right. So thank you. Thank you for allowing me this little opportunity. No, I mean, I'm sitting here listening and I listened to Charlotte and I thought, wow, she's living in a perfect world. And I mean, Camille has kind of touched on some of it. I want to repeat it. Yes. And I mean, I've listened to all of you and I thought that, yes, a lot of things of what you've said, we would really like to have in the Caribbean. And I know that Jamaica and the Caribbean really should follow the model that Jamaica is developing now, because I think that's the way to go. That's the only way you get continuity from one government to the next. But I had a question in terms of onboarding and evaluation of board members, because I've sat on several boards and like Charlotte, I first of all find out who's serving on that board, because I always say my credibility is worth more than my bank account. It doesn't matter how much board fees you're paying me. I need to know who I'm sitting with and who I'm spending some time with. So I totally, I buy into that, and I've walked away from several boards because it didn't align with my own values. And I'm sorry, if others want to sit and accept that, that's fine. They're happy with that. But I have walked away and quite nicely walked away from nice packages as well. But my question in terms of evaluation, because this is a question that's always come up, and it is a question, I'm not bashing the men, it is always a question where the men has, and this is in the Caribbean, of course, has always said, why do we need an evaluation? Why do we need, so they would go down to self-evaluation, but why do we need an evaluation? So perhaps maybe at orientation process, that's my first comment, it should be incorporated as part of the whole part of being a board member. You're expected to have some form of evaluation, because I believe in evaluation. I like to be evaluated, like to know whether, am I making any impact? Am I contributing? Am I bringing anything to the table? If I'm not bringing anything to the table, I might as well just walk away. So I think we all need that. So I think perhaps in the orientation process, that should be said outright. We will have some kind of self-evaluation, if not self-evaluation, some form of evaluation in terms of what you're bringing to the board, whether you're adding value, whether we need to change somebody. And secondly, in the Caribbean, because we've always had this pushback, how do you think that I can, because I brought it up at the last meeting, I just had a meeting tonight. Oh yes, it's written in the TOR, And I was like, okay, we've have it written in here. How do we intend to do this? I wasn't the chair of that committee, but I was just asking a question. I've just joined that committee. I was like, oh, well, that is something, it's an aspiration. Again, we go again. Well, that's an aspiration. I'm like, okay, I still need to know and understand what and how are we going to evaluate each individual board member, what they're actually bringing to the table. How do you think that I can get around this? What tips can you give me to push these individuals? And most of them, like I said, it's the men, the pushback from the men. It's like, oh no, we don't need to do that. We don't need to do that. So how do you think I can get around that?
Yes. So let's have Frank speak for his sex. And then Charlotte will come in. Yes, Frank, you hear all the trouble you're giving us.
Well, actually, yeah, of course, evaluation is necessary. And what I think is very interesting of these meetings is that you can hear how it works in other regions and compare it to yourselves and try to learn. So maybe in that respect, I can share with you. I live in the Dutch Caribbean, where you have Curacao, Aruba, St. Martin, and we used to have that after every new government came in place, and sometimes that was every year, everybody was kicked out and they took their own friends. But now at this moment in time, we have tried to solve that, and it reasonably works well in two ways. First of all, the court does not allow it anymore. So you need to have sufficient ground to dismiss a director, and just his or her political color is not enough. Then we have now in our law installed Corporate Governance Council, and according to the law, the government, acting in its capacity as shareholder, has to ask previous advice to the Corporate Governance Council when it wants to dismiss or appoint a new director. And also that council does not allow political reasons. So that are two not perfect solutions, but two ways to fight this, because we all agree that it is terrible. And then I had to laugh when I heard Liz talk about evaluation, because I know that, well, it's especially men of my age that don't want to be evaluated, but it's very simple. You just need to kick them out because it is not of these times. But what we try to do now in our country is that we set up an online evaluation test. And as soon as I have it in English, I will gladly share it with you all, where you can fill out an evaluation of the board and of your own functioning within half an hour. And then a report is generated without names, of course, and anonymously, where the most important conclusions are visible, and you can discuss those. And the huge advantage of that is that the evaluation process is, they don't have to be afraid anymore, because that's the case with these old men. They're afraid. So it is anonymous, and you get immediately to the real issues because of the statistics. So that could be, well, a way to handle this too. I wanted to share that with you.
Yes, we do it like that in Jamaica too. Charlotte, you were going to respond as well.
So I live in Jersey, Channel Islands, so also one of the offshore islands. I've been here for 15 years. On the state-owned boards that we have all non-execs by now, so it's pretty good. And I think there is a state observer on the boards generally. But with regards to board evaluations, there are a lot of people that are not so happy with having them. I've certainly seen that before, Liz. We have with regulated boards, our regulator here in Jersey says we have to do a self-evaluation every year. And obviously we have about 100 listed boards from London Stock Exchange. We have to do it every 3 years, or our shareholders will be on our necks. But the self-evaluation, like what Frank was talking about, my company has a free online tool that works globally. It's the kind of questions that you would ask at any board, anywhere in the world of any organization. And it's an app that you can use and set it up. It's fully automated. It's called boardmetrics.com. And it basically does everything for you. And it's a self-evaluation, fully anonymous. Nobody can see who's who. You'll see all the comments. There will be an indication of your weighting against best practice. And it's a really easy tool to use. And since it costs nothing, it's kind of hard for them to say they shouldn't be doing that. But it's about 45 minutes. That's 100 questions or so in it.
Yeah. In the Caribbean, anything free, we just think that's great.
Go ahead.
No, I'm not. They soon kick me out. All right. Ingrid says, as an SME recently listed on the stock exchange, it would have been good to get mentorship for board governance. We were thrown in the deep end 2 years ago. Yes, Ingrid, I can understand that. We're going to so what you need to do is become a part of the Caribbean Corporate Governance Institute. The learning here is amazing. If you're in Jamaica, the Jamaica Stock Exchange also provides some training, but Charlotte has given us the website for us to access that board evaluation tool. Thank you, Charlotte. And Professor Garrett, he is going to make two comments. So we're going to have Jonathan first, and then, of course, Prof. Garrett, if you could share with us. Jonathan.
So waiting for Jonathan.
Yes, he was ahead of you, and then
sure.
We'll close. Yes, thank you. Yes, Jonathan.
I am back. One of the issues in Guyana is that we don't have very many listed companies. What we do have is a lot of government-controlled entities. I was just thinking, from what I just heard, it might be a very good idea for board members to be appointed or pass through a screening test by Parliament or a select committee of Parliament, in which instead of a government appointing their lackeys, their friends or whoever else onto a board, people must be qualified and must be passed through a hearing by members, select committee of members of Parliament, which gives the okay, regardless of which side of Parliament you sit on, whichever jacket you wear, you must be approved by this committee from Parliament to get onto a state entity board. So it's just something I was thinking about as our presenters were talking about it, their various ideas. Thank you very much.
Yes, Jonathan. In Jamaica, we now have a fit and proper test, but what you're sounding like the US, and I don't know if we want in the Caribbean to go anywhere near the US with their kind of hearings. Panel, what did you think of what Jonathan was just suggesting?
If I may, Camille, I think you have to be a bit wary. I can imagine in Mauritius a select committee of parliamentarians. It's just another fix, really, of, well, this time you get your friend and next time I get mine. So I think you have to be really careful. I much prefer Frank's suggestion, where you've got a pool of really independent people, and maybe there's a corporate governance council, which is an independent body of some sort. But I would keep the politicians out of it if you can. The minister, in any case, is going to nominate his people onto the board. But if you can have a third who are independent, and as independent as you can possibly get, then that, in my view, would be the best way forward.
Mm-hmm.
We have, in Jersey, we have an appointments committee that deals with all of the public appointments. It's independent individuals appointed to that committee. When they do specific appointments, they sometimes bring in other independents. So I have been part of appointments of a few of sort of public bigger positions like Information Commission, Ombudsman, these kind of things. Also brings the appointment committee in, and any of the board members for any of the state-owned entities goes through that appointments committee. And that appointment committee stays there. I mean, if you Google, you can see probably Jersey's appointment committee, and you'll see that stays there no matter who's in government. It's not dependent on the government. It's for the islands asset to deal with that, because the politicians are not that. They go in and out every 4 years. So we really have to move away from the politicians being the drivers of who are serving on boards to, because they would have their own agendas as well. And you can imagine under the electricity company, I mean, it can get very messy. So independence is absolutely key, and an independent committee that deals with that. It can be difficult in certain countries to get the government to agree that, because somehow some governments don't really feel that it's all our money. They kind of feel it's their money. So it can be hard, right? It just is, we just have to keep bringing it forward, coming up with specific solutions, giving them the tools to actually implement it in an easy way, not make it too convoluted, right? Easy, simple, set up an appointments committee. Here's the procedures, here's the terms of reference that we use in another similar island. Off you go. Let's learn from each other.
Yeah. And in fairness to government, we as the people do elect them based on their promises to us, and they do need to have persons on boards who will carry out their policies. So it is that balance. Professor Garrett, your wisdom is awaited.
Not sure about wisdom. I can share a few scars. In relation to the notion of representatives, even when people are registered directors, but they still consider themselves and behave as if they were representatives, either of government or, at the moment in the UK, I'm seeing in the last 2 months a number of examples of representatives of investors who are beginning to get very, very worried about their personal liability post-COVID, and are beginning to not play the role of directors on the board as they used to, but are only passing messages back to the investor, which is totally against the whole principle. So that's a worry. But I was going to come on to the public sector much more, and we've written about this, so I can talk about it fairly openly. And at the moment, it's now before the High Court in South Africa this week, the development of Transnet, which was the huge transportation agency for South Africa, but which actually covered almost the whole of Southern Africa. And they were in such a mess that in the end, the government, in despair, appointed an independent chairman, an independent chief executive, kept only about half of the board, and then the rest of the board were bright, young, black women, usually under the age of 40, brought in. And the one thing the board agreed immediately is that the most important thing they could ever say to the government was no. And that created such chaos for a period, because they were saying, if you want us to act as a proper board, if you want to rescue this massive organization, which is fundamental to your economy, then we have to take our own decisions and not be guided by government policies in this area, some of which are totally contradictory and some of which are completely mad. Now, this didn't go down terribly well with the politicians, but we had appointed a new minister, and the minister said, I will give you political cover for as long as I'm in post at cabinet level. And I will say no on your behalf continuously until we get things sorted. I won't go into the whole story, but after 4 years, we had turned the organization round, and it was actually running proper railway, proper ports, proper gas pipelines. Then the government changed somewhat. The minister went. Immediately, the chairman was sacked. The chief executive, a very powerful woman, was sacked. And some of the board resigned because they could see what was coming. And that then lasted for a period of about 2 years before the Guptas and the corruption merchants moved in, which is why we're now in courts in South Africa. And the person leading that corruption is the accused ex-President Zuma. And that's a fairly chilling story, which isn't worked out yet, but it's ripping the leading party, the ANC, apart. And we're now waiting to see which way the leader of the ANC will actually move as the court evidence becomes more and more damning. So that's a worry, because here was an example where we did say no, and I count myself in part of that, where it had a terrific effect, where people did behave not as representatives of government, but as people trying to rescue a massive part of the economy. And it was very effective. But then it failed. So we watched that with interest. Quite separately, I just say a little bit about buddies. I'm all for buddies as long as they change every 3 months. Because I think what the board has to do is something that's hardly ever talked about, but and is never talked about in onboarding, which is the board has to do homework continuously. It's not a case of turning up to 4 or 6 meetings. It's not a case of just going to committees. You have to think about the future of this company, the purpose and future and strategy of this company 24/7. That's your commitment legally. And how you do that is very interesting. The way I do it is so mechanical that my academic colleagues think I'm mad or Victorian, or think what I do is not at all digital, but is in fact steam driven. It's crazy. But what I do is just take the old pest analysis. So we're looking at what's happening in the physical environment, what's happening in the political, what's happening in the economic, in social impacts, in technology, and in world trade, so pest. And if you've got a 12-person board, then it's fine because you get 2 buddy pairs. And for 3 months, their homework is just to read their newspapers or think about what are the major trends that will affect our business during the next 3 months that I can talk to the board about at a strategy meeting. And then at the end of that 3 months, the 2 doing physical might look at economic, the 2 doing economic might look at social, and you can change within that as well. You know, it doesn't have to be the same 2, but you make sure over an 18-month cycle, you've got everybody thinking about the outside world, thinking about what does this mean in strategy terms, and they develop themselves in very particular ways. At the beginning, everybody hates it, doesn't want to do it, thinks it's a laugh, or thinks it's just a horrible imposition. But at the end of an 18-month period, the quality of the discussion at strategy level is so much higher than it was at the beginning that they themselves recognize it in their own evaluations. So I'm quite pro buddies, but they have to be dealt with in a very particular way and under the chairman.
Prof. Garrett, that is brilliant. I mean, I'm tempted to ask how much you're paying those directors, you know, but that is brilliant. Yes.
Well, most of them don't get paid, but one of the things that has been said today is, you know, how much do you, leaving aside the not-for-profit sector, who tend not to be paid at all, or even sometimes given expenses, you know, with other directors, even in very small organizations, they may be paid 10 to 15,000 US dollars a year. In medium-sized company, that may rise to between 50 and $100,000. And as the companies get bigger, you get into figures like $200,000. Now, does that change anybody's behavior?
I'm thinking of, say, the younger people, and I didn't mean for you to actually give me the figures, but I'm so grateful that you did. I think we need these comparators in the Caribbean. But as we have younger persons on boards, one of the things that we have to be mindful of is that they are time poor very often. They're working for people. They have to, you know, give a lot to their jobs, and you know, private sector now wants you 100%. So they will always have to balance between their paid employment and their service on the board. So that is something I have noticed, because sometimes even when you have them in the meetings, they're busy on their phones and they're not taking notes. They're trying to deal with issues that they're faced with. So that's why I was kind of alluding to that.
Yeah, but if they begin to get an alternative source of income and they have not a contract for employment as an executive, but they have a separate contract for services as a director, which is paid, then you begin to change the dynamic quite dramatically.
Yes. Ladies and gentlemen, I see no other questions, but this has been very enlightening, and I'm going to ask each of our panelists to give us their closing remarks as we wind up this section of today's event. So, should we start with you, Charlotte?
Yeah, thank you very much. And it's been great hearing everybody's input, and always hear from different places in the world is interesting, because new things come out all the time. I think my closing remark is that us as directors have a key responsibility in ensuring that whoever new we get onto the board, or if we are new on a board that is all new, then together we should be leaders enough to do the right thing and ensure that everybody comes up the curve as soon as possible. And I think once we take that responsibility seriously, we can work it together. It's when people don't care enough, that's a problem. And if they don't care enough, they shouldn't be there.
Profound words. We agree. Jane?
I think, as I said, I think the board is a strategic asset. Each seat is precious, and people need to add value or leave, as Charlotte said. And I think that onboarding and orientation is absolutely essential for people to add value. But I don't think it stops there. I think it is about continuous learning throughout, as a board director.
Thank you. Thank you, Jane. And Sir Frank, Professor Frank.
Thank you. No, Frank. Thank you, Camille. Yeah, actually, I would like to thank you all, everybody present here virtually, because I'm amazed about the number of insights and very good suggestions that I've heard. It enriches everybody, so thank you very much, especially, of course, Charlotte and Jane and Bob. The subject that we just discussed, value for money, or why are you doing what you were doing when you were on a board, and does it need to be does there need to be some equivalent between what you get and what you give, yes or no, and how does that work? I think especially for our Caribbean, it is, and probably also for many other parts in the world, it is a very relevant subject. And I would love to see that maybe we can somewhere in the future give that special attention, because it's something that I very much recognize that we in our country struggle with, and I hear some others say that too. And then finally, actually, what I learned again is also onboarding is a vital part of being a director, but also of being a board of directors. So actually it's everybody's responsibility. And indeed it's part of lifelong learning. Like Nigel said, he loves it, and I love that because I love it too. And I would like to congratulate you with your chair in that.
Thank you, Professor Kunneman. And we can tell that you are a professor and a lecturer in civil law and governance, because every time you speak, you are educating us. So thank you for those remarks. Charlotte, your presentation was extremely insightful. I have your checklist now as part of what I need to keep very close to me and what I will be looking out for in terms of all our boards and the onboarding, because we do onboarding, but not to the level and to the depth that you have shared, well, certainly in Jamaica, shared with us today. And I can promise you there are going to be a lot of very spirited conversations on this topic. And I will be calling your name as my reference and source. So if your ears start to ring, know that it's coming from conversations in Jamaica about onboarding. And Jane, your examples of what you were experiencing just now as you have joined a new board made things so very relevant. And of course, your very practical sharing. So panelists, and of course, even though he wasn't on the panel, we cannot forget Professor Bob. with his experience and wealth of information and terrifying stories about what does actually happen. So, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to close off on this section. I really want to thank you on behalf of the Caribbean Corporate Governance Institute for having shared so freely and so well. So with that, I will hand back over to our leader, Kamla.
Well done, Camille.
Thank you very much, Camille. That was really such a great panel discussion, and the presentation from Charlotte, I agree with you. There are so many notes that we would all have now that we'll be able to apply to our own boards. Let me just let everyone remind you that we are not yet finished. We do in fact have another hour that is allocated for this discussion, and we can go for a short break, but I want to first say that there's a direct connection between what we have just discussed and some other things that are unfolding. Yesterday, I had a conversation with Dr. Terence Farrell, and he was letting me know that in fact there are some very active cases before the courts here in Trinidad and Tobago with respect to directors and their fiduciary duty for state-owned boards. And so we have to look at if there's going to be a greater awareness. And I think this was something that Camille really began the conversation with, that here in the Caribbean, there has not been that greater focus on this issue of induction and orientation, because it's so rare that we have directors who are called to account for their fiduciary duty. There's a huge difference that's happening in the landscape now. We had, in fact, a decision of the Privy Council just at the end of 2018, which really signaled the fact that there's going to be a huge difference in the way directors of state boards are going to be evaluated, and it's going to happen in the courtroom. And so if we can make a connection between that and the absolute need for the right orientation and induction so that we have less of these contentious issues going before the court. So that was just a little preliminary to let you know there's so much more for us to discuss, but I know that we have had you on here since 12:30, some of you are just before that. So we can take a short 15-minute break to allow everyone either a bathroom break or to spread to have a little walk, or for me to get my dogs quiet again. And then we return for our discussions as we look at evolving governance practices as we are in the midst of this pandemic with COVID-19. All right, Chairman, did you want to say anything before we take a short break?
No, I enjoyed the conversation. I'm looking forward to the discussion coming out of it.
Yes.
I think there is a lot. I like the fact that the testosterone poisoning was highlighted. I think that's also a problem that we need to deal with. I tend to mine for conflict and farm for dissent, and I think every chairman should. So I look forward to continuing the conversation.
Okay, great. So we're going to just take a short break, 15 minutes. The room will remain open. Christy is in the background with us, so if anyone leaves and needs to re-enter the room, so you can just take off your videos or mute your mics as required, take a very short break, and then we return to continue the conversation. Okay, yes, and I see Professor Kunneman will be leaving us. Thank you very, very much. And we look forward to having you again, because you have such experience that you are going to be able to help us in our own growth and understanding. All right, so and Jane, I'll see you in a few minutes as well too. All right, okay.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you. Thank you very much, Christy. Okay, so let us now look at this last hour that we are going to have together. Actually, it's just a half hour remaining, as we discuss the evolving governance practices as we see it. The issue I raised with respect to fiduciary duties of directors and state boards will have to be an informed conversation. We are going to need to present to you what were the issues that came before the Court of Appeal, and therefore what were what was the basis, because while two of the judges had one opinion, there was a dissenting judgment as well, which usually is very important for us to look at. So, but I wanted to ask this question of you, Camille, because I was also having this discussion with Connie Smith out of Barbados as to why is there such a difficulty for us to be able to get our directors generally to look at this whole area of how we select directors, how we onboard them, how we orient them to ensure that we get the best quality. And we both pointed to what was happening in Jamaica with respect to the very clear thought process that went into developing a structure for having that pool of persons who would be trained in governance and who therefore would be able to bring greater value to a board. And we wondered whether it may be the fact that the IMF conditionalities might have been one of the factors that would have helped Jamaica walk that road, or are there other issues? And therefore, what can we learn from that so that we could speed up that process and not take 20 years in the rest of the Caribbean region to be able to follow in having that kind of structure and system in place?
Private sector push was critical. Right, and it's just getting everybody to understand that when you get up in the morning and you go to turn on your pipe to have a shower, if there is no water coming through your tap, that's a failure in governance, right? And so we as the people have to be engaged and concerned about these issues. And the private sector has really been pushing for governance. As I said, it should have been passed already, and it now has to go back to Parliament because there was it dealt with select. And I need to send it to you all. It's the
please.
Yeah, it's called the Selection and Nomination Regulations, and it is made pursuant to our Public Bodies Management and Accountability Act. And so those are the regulations that will deal with the selection of directors. And it even did things like saying certain persons like parish councillors can no longer qualify. So there are a list of disqualified directors, but I will share it. But it's taking a lot of private sector push. I'm not sure if it was an IMF conditionality. The IMF's concern was more about reducing the number of public sector entities. So I can't answer that part.
But Camille, where does the impact of your corporate governance code sit with that? I'm asking because in the UK there was a very good project called the Women on Board project, and when they were asked by when David Cameron came into power, he asked Sir Howard Davies to look at this in 2010. Mm-hmm. And one of the things that they recommended was that the corporate governance code be updated to require public listed companies to make certain disclosures with regard to how they approach nominations, whether they have a policy or not, and also looking at the gender balance in their organizations. But that was really housed within the corporate governance code, which in the UK is supposed to be voluntary, but there's a considerable amount of pressure to actually adhere to its tenets and requirements. So I was wondering, in Jamaica, where does your corporate governance code sit in relation to the two bits of legislation that you are now trying to pass, or the one that you've passed and the one that's coming up?
Right. So the corporate governance code, and it's quite an anomaly here in Jamaica. And I think some of this goes back to, it's part of Greta's legacy. The Corporate Governance Code sits with the PSOJ, the Private Sector Organization of Jamaica. And I would say that this organization is the leading entity when it comes to governance, both in the private and public sector. We are currently revising our code as well. Now, what we're trying to, so you have the Corporate Governance Code for private sector, which sits with the PSOJ, Corporate Governance Committee, PSOJ, Private Sector Organization of Jamaica. But we've been trying to get the Jamaica Stock Exchange to adopt it as its code, so that so far as listed companies are concerned, compliance is mandatory. The stock listing rules do have a section on governance, but it's nowhere as extensive as the code. What happened is that the public sector developed its own code, and it's an excellent code, but we're trying to move from beyond that code to having regulations, because as you know, with a code, if you don't comply with it, what are the sanctions? The Auditor General writes you up. We want it to be a little stronger than that. I don't know if that answers your question.
Yeah, it does. It does amplify it actually, because in the UK, if you want to be a listed company, definitely if you want to be in the premium category, you have to comply with the governance code. Now, the governance code does have a set of principles you have to comply with, but your provisions, you may not have to comply with those, but it requires the shareholders to speak up if your reason for not complying doesn't satisfy them. So there is a nexus, there is a parallel in the UK as well. I was just interested to hear, because we're about to, Trinidad and Tobago, look at revising our corporate governance code. And it really does need to be considerably strengthened from the version of it that we have before us at the moment.
Right. Ours is in draft. I can speak with the committee and perhaps shoot it to you.
Yeah,
I don't see why they'd mind. Yeah. And we followed the King Code, but they looked at New Zealand and a number of other places.
Right.
But a little committee that worked on that.
Yeah. Thank you. I could go on, but I'll let others out get in.
Yes. Thank you. Yes, Nigel, we wanted to ensure that you were able to weigh in a little bit on some of the challenges that Liz raised earlier about, and I'm hoping it was Liz who said it, about the difficulty of having men accept a different way of doing things sometimes when it comes to board practices.
You want me to wear it?
Absolutely.
As I said before, I mean, I am of the view that there is so much we don't know. And therefore, we need to surround ourselves with people not so much of like minds as of different competencies, different experiences. And that's not just for show, that's to ensure that we have every brain in the game, as Jack Welch used to say. That we mine for conflict and farm for dissent. And I'm a big Adam Grant fan, and his latest book, Think Again, speaks to the need to surround yourself with what he refers to as a challenge networks, disagreeable people, he refers to them, that will challenge you and will question. And for me, if they don't, you should probe. You should, I mean, you can read the body language and ask for whatever position to be put on the table. I was listening earlier about the cliques and people deciding on positions before they come into the boardroom. And I don't accept that. I want debate, and I want vigorous debate, and I want people to, to be very clear. If you're going to come up with a position, I want to understand your rationale. And I want to make it very clear that there is that all board members, all executives, in fact, all people on the in the organization, understand the organization's purpose, why it exists. And therefore every conversation has to take place in the context of that purpose. And I think we have moved beyond a shareholder first approach to a company approach, where the success of the company, not for the short term but for the long term, is paramount. And if that means, and we just did it in the case of NFM, if that means focusing on your customer as opposed to your shareholder for the short term, you focus on your customer and you ensure that the customer is well served. And for me, the rationale for that is that if I can keep the customer happy, even if I, as a company, have to take a short-term hit, it will pay off in the long run. So those kinds of conversations, and I think the boards on which I serve, at least, yeah, most of them, are well represented by the women and strong women, not women who kowtow, and I prefer that. So we have to manage the testosterone, and we have to lead with humility and intellectual curiosity, and make sure that we constantly ask, what is bothering you? What do you think? Why? You know, but I would continue to probe for the rationale, and we're gonna have some good debates. I like debates.
Okay, now I want to take it a little further, because I don't know who else, but I was fascinated by what Charlotte shared in terms of that vertical model, where she spoke about not just now the gender, but really an entire generation of persons who are so caught in their mindset, you know. And I found it very interesting that she spoke about this, the new generation, the millennials, who are not so new anymore, but still they're the ones who are moving into the boardroom now, and how very different it is and how much easier it is for they to accept diversity, to be able to have different types of discussions. So I'm wondering who else may have that experience or share that view, or were surprised by the findings of the survey that Charlotte shared. So would anyone else like to give their take on, are you seeing that type of evolution in governance practices today, where the millennials are entering the boardroom and it's an absolutely different culture in terms of the way decisions are being made?
I think we're seeing it to some extent with the startups, with the unicorn companies, where there's a younger generation of entrepreneurs taking over and obviously creating these huge companies that then go for listings with people like Mark Zuckerberg, for example, right? But in our region, we're not seeing it. I have to say that the older generation are not willing to move on. Or necessarily embrace the younger generation yet. And I think that is a challenge, especially as we move into the tech age, where you need digital experience around the boardroom table, and the current generation of directors don't really have that. So I think, you know, we are seeing perhaps, you know, the beginning of transition. And in this part of the world, there's going to be some very important transitions in the family businesses, which are very large, wealthy businesses in the region, as we move from the second generation to the third generation of the family, which is where the wealth is traditionally lost. So that's going to be a big challenge in this part of the world. But we're not yet really seeing enough of the millennials stepping up. It's too early, I think, here. But I found her comments very interesting, and because we're just used to the traditional boardroom, right?
So
And you know, the millennials do think differently, so of course they'll do things differently.
Mm-hmm. Can I add something there, Kamala?
So, Joanne, can I just ask you to reposition your camera a little bit lower so we could see you properly? Because excellent,
better?
yes.
Okay.
That's it, perfect.
Well, as governance professionals, let me say, I can attest to Nigel's embracing of difference, because we do have some pretty feisty discussions on our boards and on the board I am with him. But I think as governance professionals, we do have a responsibility here, because diversity and inclusion, which I'm a trainer in, a champion of, is if you don't embrace it, and not just gender diversity, but all the other aspects of diversity, you're actually leaving competitive advantage on the table. And so from a governance perspective, it's got to be not why you're doing it, but why not? And somebody provocatively pointed out to me the other day, nobody has made a business case that says that companies perform better with an all-male board. So why is that the starting position, right? So we have many all-male boards or predominantly male boards, or boards where women are less than 30%, which is the threshold for meaningful contribution, or impactful contribution, I should say. So as governance professionals, I really would like to see us really step up our advocacy of the fact that there is considerable competitive advantage that companies are leaving on the table by not embracing diversity. So it's not about, as I say, why embrace it? It's about, well, hold on a minute. If you're working and thinking and acting in the best interests of your organization, medium term and long term, why aren't you embracing it? Why aren't you looking at your systems that result in you having a single demographic at the top table, or even at the top of your organization? So I do think as governance professionals, we have a responsibility to beat that drum.
I think that, if I may, I think that's absolutely true, Joanne. But I think that there is a huge amount of skepticism,
correct,
about the validity of the research.
Yes.
You know, very often, as I say, gender is simply not on the board agenda.
Yeah. Yes.
It's as if they're, you know, in a different ivory tower.
Well, that's why I'm turning it around, Jane, and saying, well, where is the research that says all male boards are good for business? Because we're starting off from a presumption. So if you can, I agree with you. I mean, I can show you, unfortunately, I can show you studies that show there's very little impact of gender diversity, and there's some that show there is significant. But there's absolutely no business case that I've ever come across that says all male boards are good for business.
Okay, and if I may, sorry, Jane.
Kamala, going back to your question on the millennials, I mean, I think, you know, as Jane's saying, maybe it's a little bit too early in many parts of the world to see what impact they're having in boards, but I think they are having impacts in the boardroom as a stakeholder group, whether it's customers or other stakeholder organizations, and the whole ESG or sustainability, whatever you want to call it, I think is really being driven by millennials. I mean, as Joanne's just been talking about, a lot of the diversity and inclusion conversations, again, are being driven by them, or what's the new word for it, the Millsies or something. Somebody was telling me the other day, was talking about Millsies now, being the millennial and Generation Z.
Yeah, that's right. That's
they are driving a lot of these conversations. And I think, you know, what Charlotte was saying, which, you know, how are then the people, the older generation in the boardroom dealing with this? You know, the US Business Roundtable discussion, where many people heard what that signing of the document about stakeholder capitalism and engagement has been a paradigm shift. And yet the CEOs sitting there were like, so excited. This is just business as usual. And I think it's, you know, that they're not necessarily getting what other generations and stakeholders are probably thinking about and expecting to happen. And I think it's going to be saying, Joanne, I think it's going to be a really exciting time for us, governance professionals, to see how is this all going to play out over the next few years.
Because millennials are like 75% right now, or 50% of the US workforce, and will be 75% of the workforce by 2025. And their approach to work is much more collaborative, much more flexible, much more open space. It's a complete paradigm shift. And if companies are looking to their medium to long-term future, that's what the talent pool will be looking at.
Okay, Nigel, were you about to say something as well?
No, I'm good.
Okay, all right. So I want to then take advantage of
Jackie has a hand up.
Oh, she does? I'm sorry, I missed that.
I just took it down when Kamala started to speak.
Okay. That's all right.
I was going to add just that I absolutely agreed with Alison. I think it is a bit early still to get the millennials in the boardroom, and I think it's going to be extremely exciting when they do get there. But the best board, I believe, and I don't have the research to back it up, but from my experience, will be the diverse board, especially in countries like Trinidad and Tobago and Jamaica, and where we are so mixed culturally. So it's not only diversity, male, female, it's in every aspect of our being. We'll be a better performing board. The millennial case, I think, needs to be balanced. Their exuberance and their tech knowledge needs to be balanced a bit by the risk appetite of the company. And I think that, and you kind of see that already, that you have to take the two in hand, but you have to move it forward. And it is going to happen, and it's going to be extraordinarily exciting, but we have to embrace it.
So, Jacqueline, I want to ask you then, as we have you on the floor, the whole uncertainty that boards have had to face with the absolute change brought about in the environment by pandemic, and the fact that so many organizations have had to find absolutely different ways of being able to deliver service if they're going to be able to survive. Have you seen an impact in the boardroom where the thinking itself has changed and it has become more collaborative, and are they reaching out to the millennials? Because I will tell you my personal experience with CCGI, it is young people who have been the driving force behind our ability to do what we do right now. So have we seen that difference?
Well, the technology does come from the millennials. It does come from that environment. So the companies have to embrace that in order to be able to survive and to reach people in this environment. And you are seeing that in the boardroom for sure. I think almost every board now has adopted technology in order to survive. And you're seeing a greater use of that. So I think, yes, it has happened. I certainly see it happening.
Okay, but is it happening that they are embracing of the technology and they will take the advice, or are they more open to having millennials actually be decision makers in the boardroom?
That will take time because again, you have to balance the experience. I think you could, I could certainly see a board where you could have 1 or 2 millennials on the board table, but it has to be balanced, I think, with some of the experience to get the
and I think
benefit of the experience.
Go ahead, Camille.
I was in a board meeting on Monday, and we had 2 millennial young women, and they were feisty and they were self-confident. And I was just delighted because before I'd had elderly women and we didn't have the 30%. So now we have the 30%. And they were making themselves heard. So what I have seen is that
is exciting. Yeah. When you see a new person come in and shake up the board or ask questions that have never been asked or challenge the status quo a bit, that really is exciting.
Yeah. And in other instances, because on another board, we've targeted and brought in millennials. So that's a millennial male. He's 29. And he comes, chartered accountant, lots of knowledge. What I'm seeing is observing and learning. So that's what I'm kind of seeing in, but something that has concerned me about the next generation of leaders is the older ones tended to be a little bit more, maybe I should use the word paternalistic and caring. Some of these that I'm seeing now, not the ones I just referred to earlier, tend to be a little bit more cutthroat. And so it's something I'm watching, because in our societies in the Caribbean, we have, the elders, so to speak, in many ways have cared for large swaths of the society. And that's why they served on public boards. That's why they engaged in philanthropic activities. So I'm waiting to see how that plays out, like with some of our ones who have started their businesses doing well, doing extremely well. But then when you hear about how the company is dealing with staff, it gives you pause.
Okay, we are just 5 minutes away from our close time, but I saw that Charlotte shared in the chat the under 35 advisory boards. So I want to ask Charlotte if she would share a thought on that for us. But before persons run away, I also want to say Christy has put in the chat a survey link. We'd like to ask everyone, please give us your evaluation and feedback on today's session, because it does help us in our planning process. But Charlotte, I want to ask you, to share with us your thoughts on this under 35 advisory boards, and also from your research, what percentage of millennials will you find in the boardroom?
Sorry, what was the last question, Kamala?
Yeah, what percentage of the millennials were you finding in the boardroom when you did your survey?
Sure. So in terms of percentage, it's not many, right? If there's one on a board, that's tops. But there are boards that are open to embrace that. I mean, we're not saying that we should have all under 35-year-old boards, right? But I think we need to look at is, what is the generational diversity of your board? Do you have people in their 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s? I have to admit, I look at my boards and we tend to be 50s and 60s. Right? And sometimes we're all 50s or all 60s or even all 70s. And it's like, wow, we gravitate towards people that is within the same decade as us. The decade you're born in. So I'm born in the 60s. All of us born in the 60s have something together that we bring with us for the rest of our life. And I think we have to consciously choose to say, okay, let's have someone in the 60s, 70s, 60s, 50s and 40s. Let's just start with 40. When I started at 42, people told me, you're too old. And I was like, well, I'm here, so something you can do about that, right? But on advisory boards is the midway job, if you want, and a number of especially the kind of companies that are dependent on the millennials as stakeholders. So that would be all retail companies, furniture, food, everything, as they become the main buyers. I mean, I don't know about you, but I've bought the sofa I need to buy for now, and I might never buy another sofa again. But all of the younger people go out and they need to equip their house. They are the main buyers. So we have had especially retail companies coming to us to ask, what can you do to help us get the voice of under 35-year-olds onto the boardroom table? I have tried to advocate in the UK for all universities and higher education organizations to work with us to give a basics and governance to everybody, after they're 18, basically. Just a basic 1 week incorporated in the curriculum. They all seemed keen, all the universities, so maybe it's just about giving them the content to actually do that. So there's a number of under 35 advisory boards around with different companies, but especially retail companies, because they do need that input. And a lot of them also like to hear the voices of their employees under 35, but you actually get more from non-employees because they're not afraid of getting their paycheck, right? So they might be more honest with what they say. And it's still an honor for them, and it's a great place to develop yourself as a board member too. So if you wanted to upskill your population in each of your countries, try to start putting together under 35 advisory boards and work with them and learn from them in that way. And through that, you would probably find candidates that would be appropriate to bring onto your main board earlier than what you would normally do. That's my recommendation.
Mm-hmm. Excellent. Thank you very much, Charlotte. Yes, Jacqueline, I see that you
what
wanted
I had,
to make another
what I had wanted to mention earlier, and it slipped me, was what you are seeing the millennials bring to the table, and what is becoming more and more important is ESG and the whole environmental and social governance aspect, and how important that is. And the companies have to embrace that now and make that part of their very being.
Mm-hmm.
That is an important thrust. That is a millennial issue, and that is there on the table and being dealt with.
Thank you, Jacqueline. That is a beautiful point for us to now invite Professor Garrett, because I know that this is an area that has really gathered his attention for quite a bit. So, Professor Garrett, we are looking to you for some closing comments, and specifically to comment on Jacqueline's contribution just now with respect to this whole move to ESG.
Oh, right. You wrong-footed me. I wasn't expecting to speak now. I think the first comment then is you already have a way into this conversation which came out of the November conference. And that's one person called Peter Aylwin. And I didn't know who Peter was, but I've been working on and off with him ever since November. Peter is an unusual character because he comes from a very, very rich Australian family office. But he ran away. And he ran away to Hollywood to become an actor, didn't do very well, so became a professional wrestler, and then found that in Hollywood, the one thing they cannot do at all is finance movies. And because he had a finance background, sort of, through the family side, not officially, he financed a whole load of movies. And he was very well appreciated for that. In doing that, he found there were other high net worth individuals, or in fact, ultra high net worth individuals, who were following the line Jacqueline just mentioned. But they didn't know what to do. And they didn't really coordinate with each other about this. So one small group of them now is making a movie, a full Hollywood blockbuster documentary movie on the future of sustainability and the future of oceans. But that is really not very much in truth. Peter and his generation of millennials don't particularly like shareholder-based companies at all, because most family offices aren't really like that. They may invest in some, but they tend to invest much more experimentally than I had ever realized in all sorts of other ventures. The only way they have had until now is really going to the World Economic Forum. But they don't like the World Economic Forum because it's full of boring old men and heads of state and people who go around having photo opportunities and shaking hands a lot. So there seems to be, and this is where I'm on slightly dangerous ground at the moment because I don't know enough, there seems to be another group of them. These are the millennials coming through, who are called Horasis, Horasis. This is based out of Switzerland, like World Economic Forum, but is run by a guy called Frank Jürgen Richter. And I've only had 2 conversations with him so far, so that's why I say I have to be careful. But he has an amazing capacity to pull together ultra wealthy people in the world to let them talk to each other about these issues. Now, in educational terms, this is frankly disastrous, as I've said to him, because he pulls them all together on one day, and at the moment it has to be done through Zoom. So he then breaks them up into very small groups, and yes, they do have a good time, but There are 900 of them. So you can imagine the lack of educational leverage because they're all so dispersed at the moment. And so there are all sorts of issues about how they're going to move forward. However, and again, these numbers need to be carefully thought through, but it looks as though between them, as a millennial generation who are beginning to take over their family offices, so nothing to do with the stock markets, their investment volume could be between 40 and 60 trillion dollars. Now that is mind-boggling. And it makes most stock markets look fairly small. And the question is, given what you're talking about at the moment, how can we begin to talk, even with a handful of those people, to begin to take them in the direction of effective corporate governance in the context of ESG for the future? And I don't know at the moment, but next week I will be giving one of the many sessions, the first big Horasis session out of Switzerland. And I hope to know more over the next few months about this. But remember, Peter gave us a talk in November. That is on video. And that is the talk where he was talking about the great wealth transfer. And that's the name he's using at the moment to describe this global process, which is going on silently and for the most part invisibly around the world. Now, it may all come to nothing, it may all end in disaster, I don't know, but I think for the first time in a long time, there's hope of another generation coming through in the family offices, some of which are corrupt, but most aren't, in the family offices, whereby there's a generation beginning to take over saying, not only should we do something about this, or even we should do something about this, but actually saying we have the capacity to do something about this. And that I find fascinating at the moment. Full stop.
Thank you very much, Professor Garrett. And for persons who may be interested, the video recording of Peter Awolon's contribution on the Great Wealth Transfer is available on YouTube on the CCGI channel. So you can go out and check it out there as well. So, and we look forward to when Professor Garrett learns more that he will be able to share with us. I want to ask our chairman then, if he will come in and close off the session for today. I was seeing him up to a minute ago. Did Nigel leave us? No, he is, well, probably not by his desk, but at any rate, we are 7 minutes over our time. I had not anticipated that we would have crossed our time, but really the discussion has been absolutely fascinating. And as we move forward, clearly there is so much more that we need to learn and learn quickly if we are going to help make a difference in the boardrooms, because the decisions we make there really impact lives and the quality of lives in our society. So I want to
thank you, Kamla. Sorry about that.
Yes.
Another very good session. I'm really looking forward to the others, and of course to the governance week later this month, and of course the women in governance in July. Yep. Thank you. Great job.
Yes. All right. Thank you all very much.
Thank you.
And yes, the fourth meeting of the International Learning Network is the 4th of August. So we will share more details with you moving forward. Thank you all and have a wonderful evening.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Yes.
Bye, everybody.
Thanks, Kamala.
You're welcome.